Sorry, seconds.
So now I'm now alive?
Yes, you can introduce yourself.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Johan Verreth. I'm the former professor of aquaculture and fisheries at Wageningen University. Since the end of December, I am retired, although I still am quite busy with different things. And one of them is this MOOC. And I'm looking forward to have a discussion with Mike. Mike, maybe I can give the floor to you now.
Yes, thank you, Johan. Yes, and my name's Michael Lee. I'm a professor of sustainable livestock systems at the University of Bristol here in the UK, and I also hold a position at Rothamsted Research as head of sustainable agriculture science.
We have scheduled a discussion on meat, on livestock and fish, and how these compare with each other. But maybe the first question we should address is whether we really need meat. Do we need animal sourced food at all? There were questions also in the former days on the MOOC about vegetarian food habits or veganism. What are your thoughts about this, Michael?
Yeah, you know, if you were to say, you know, at a personal level, do we need meat to provide all the nutrients, macronutrients, micronutrients that we need for all daily functions? And the answer is no. We can have a healthy diet as a vegan, but the issue is that diet would retain quite a lot of supplements. Or it would have certain foods which are probably out of the price brackets of everybody on the planet. So at an individual level, yes, I think you can have a healthy vegan diet, of course. But to say that that is a solution for everybody on the planet, and we would have more bioavailable nutrients by removing all livestock products from the food chain, I think is incorrect. I think a sustainable future for food security includes livestock products as a vital part of key nutrients.
I think I agree entirely with that. There are studies on the nutrient intakes in several parts of the world. I myself am familiar with studies done in Bangladesh, where in that case, of course, the intake of very small fish that people can get in the rivers, in the ponds, simply by catching it, is sometimes supplies 30 or 40 or 50% of some mineral intakes of their needs. And if they would not have that, they would have a deficiency in these minerals. So for certain areas in the world, animal sourced food, in other areas it might be milk or whatever, might be very crucial for their food security, for the nutrition security, I would say.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think within a vegan diet, real careful consideration has to be put on key micronutrients, be they vitamins, particularly something like vitamin B12, or certain minerals like zinc and selenium. Now, a very well balanced, made up, rationed, if you like, vegan diet can provide those. But in many parts of the world, it is a much easier approach to include a small amount of animal-based protein to provide those key nutrients. A perfect example is, you know, in your Bangladesh example of those small fish. Many parts of Africa, you know, it's a small amount of either poultry, meat or eggs, or a small amount of dairy products. You know, one of the perfect examples, you use an example of Bangladesh. Malawi is another perfect example, which has the highest level of stunting. It also has the lowest consumption of animal-based protein in the world. Now, if you look into that, the vast majority of that is driven by low levels of iodine in the diet because of low levels of dairy consumption. Now, that's not to say you can't get iodine from other sources, but it is an extremely bioavailable and available source for that diet.
Yeah, right. So I think we agree on the question that veganism or vegetarian food habits might be a personal choice for an individual person, but for, let's say, the point of discussion that we have here in this MOOC, food security and hunger on planet Earth, it might be very wise to have also animal-sourced food, and so meat.
Yeah, I think it's completely irresponsible to push or suggest that a vegan diet globally would be more sustainable, and the removal of all livestock, all animal products can be replaced with plants globally. Now, in a Western-styled diet, we can certainly select key plants, key micronutrients, key yeasts to make vitamin B12, key fungi, because we have access to those. But on a global perspective, that is not appropriate.
Yeah, I don't know how it is in the UK, but here in the Netherlands, the governmental food policies are now trying to move us eating less meat, red meat, in favor of more vegetables, more fruit, and more fish. So, and they call it, we should go more towards a sort of a Mediterranean diet, whatever that means. But anyway, it means more balanced, less meat, more plants, more fruits, yes, and more fish. That's basically the idea, and that fits to what you said. Here in the West, we eat quite a lot of animal meat, and that can be less. But if we take it on a global scale, it's quite different.
Yeah, I think when we think about livestock products in a healthy, balanced diet, it's about responsible consumption of animal-based products, and therefore understanding the key benefits that they provide in delivering key micronutrients and essential nutrients such as essential amino acids. So I think it's the balance that we need to address in the West. Yeah. I mentioned to you while we were off air, Johan, about this paper by Beth Hall, and we'll put this paper available for the MOOC subscribers on the course. And it basically analyzed the US. If the whole of the US food system was vegan, it removed all livestock products from the US food chain. And it was a very interesting paper, but it showed, it showed a significant increase in malnutrition for parts of the US. Yes, there were some benefits. I'm not saying that there weren't some benefits. Greenhouse gas, for example, was dropped dramatically because of the removal of all ruminants. But key micronutrients and malnutrition was increased. And it shows even in a country like the US of A, that you cannot remove all livestock products and have a healthy diet for the whole population. It's a very interesting paper.
Oh, I don't know it, so I'm looking forward to that link.
I will forward it, yeah. Okay. Hopefully Beth pays me for this big plug.
Maybe we should move to another question in this discussion. If we agree that we need animal-sourced food, then the question, of course, is what type of meat or animal-sourced food we should need. We already touched the discussion that we have here in the Netherlands, that we should eat, that's the recommendation, less red meat in favor of fish and vegetables, I said. So I would say more white meats, and in my perception, that includes also chicken, maybe milk and fish, and less beef, basically, and maybe less pork, I don't know. But that's a bit more the ideas how we move forward here in the Netherlands. What do you think about that?
Well, it's for horses for courses. There are certain livestock which will have other benefits for different metrics of sustainability, and there's lots of trade-offs associated with it. So, if, for example, you mentioned about the increase in poultry consumption. Well, poultry consumption has skyrocketed in the West. Poultry consumption within the UK has risen by 365% in the last 10 years. So a phenomenal increase in the amount of poultry consumed. Now, if you think about, as in terms of efficiency of nutrient transfer, poultry are certainly more efficient than ruminants. But of course, they do require a much higher quality diet. So they will require human-based foods, cereals, pulses. 75% of UK wheat goes into the poultry diets. So you would have this competition for land. Whereas ruminants, you know, there's a lot of issues associated with, well, particularly if we're relating to carbon in production of ruminants. And I think that's probably the main message coming from the Netherlands about why we should reduce red meat consumption. But and then there's different aspects of that. We can go down a discussion, particularly talking about greenhouse gas, but also we can start talking about health. And I don't know if your position, Johan, was about health between white meat and red meat.
Yes, that's the, let's say, the background or the driving factor for this recommendation of the national food authorities here in the Netherlands. It's for public health reasons.
And is that driven on heme iron?
Sorry?
Is that driven by heme iron?
I'm not so sure whether it's driven by that. It's I think driven by the observation that people who eat a lot of red meat have more risk for cardiovascular diseases, more cholesterol, all these sorts of things. And it has also to do with the antioxidant levels that you take in. You take much more if you have fruits in your diet, more fruits. And the Dutch do not eat a lot of fruit. These kind of things are I think, I'm not a human nutritionist, so I'm not sure, but I think that these are the driving factors.
I certainly agree. I think we certainly do need more fruit and vegetables to be in a healthy diet. I think the biggest issue when we start talking about red meat is that consumers generally get confused because the messages aren't clear between processed meat and red meat. Now, for many, many years, to preserve meat, we had to process it in numerous ways, either adding brine or smoking or different additives like sulfites added to the meat to preserve it, and also process it, so much higher levels of salt and sugars, which actually were retained within that meat. So when you're consuming that processed meat, you are also consuming a lot of these additives and preservatives, which recent research has shown and meta-analyses has shown is detrimental to human health, you know, at levels above 75 to 100 grams per day consumption. You know, there's some clear data coming from that. So, you know, there is this health risk with high levels of consumption of processed meat.
Yeah, it might be. But let's go back to, I found your notion that the chickens, poultry need a lot of high quality diets and actually are more in competition with human food than ruminants are. I find it very interesting because not so long ago I tried myself to make a comparison about the protein conversion efficiency over the whole production cycle. Between two types of fish, salmon, which is a carnivorous animal, and tilapia, that's widely spread now. It's farming in Asia and also in Africa. It comes up, and in Latin America it's being produced, and that's considered as let's say as an herbivorous fish. It's not really herbivorous, but at least it's much lower on the trophic food chain. But if you take the whole conversion efficiencies, then salmon is almost as double as efficient as tilapia. Now, there are several reasons for, but one of them is also that the quality of the feed that is given to salmon is of a much higher quality, far more balanced, very well studied, but of course also they go immediately in competition with human food. Right now, with these salmon feeds, they have a lot of soya inside. In the past, they used basically fish meal and fish oil, but that is a minor ingredient now. But by feeding them with soya, you are immediately in, and even glutens and so on, you are immediately in competition with human food. And you enter also in that seafood chain, then with the terrestrial, you link it with the terrestrial food chain and take up all the environmental risks of the terrestrial food chain also in that seafood chain. So I think that's the major drawback to that kind of element, in this case of salmon. And I found also some literature, some papers of Rai and co-authors very recently, who compared different systems here. He compared beef and chicken and pork and also different fishes on their protein conversion efficiencies, as I calculated it. And then you see that most fishes are not more efficient than most livestock. They are more or less at the efficiency level of pork, but salmon is doing better, and salmon is at the same level as chicken or slightly better even. But again, we come to that same point that what you mentioned about chickens.
Yeah.
And so the interesting part of ruminants, to my view, is that you can feed them with roughages, grass, things that nobody else can eat, and they convert it in something very useful. Now, some of these fishes that we have, like tilapia, some shrimp, by the way, also, they are capable to harvest from the ponds where they are being farmed microalgae, or they are capable to harvest flocks of bacteria, and that can really stimulate the whole conversion efficiency if you produce them in a proper way, that you provide these kind of elements. Then you do not need to produce everything through, I would say, commercial feeds, pelleted feeds, concentrates.
I agree, and if we relate it to poultry as well, on a similar vein, I think the poultry industry has been a huge success in terms of providing high quality protein for human diets. There's no doubt about it. But the biggest issue in terms of sustainability is that huge demand for high quality feed, particularly soya, cereals. And if we think about how or what our broiler chicken evolved from, Gallus, which was a jungle fowl, which was consuming berries and insects. And actually, if you look at the gut, which evolved for millions of years of these birds, their gut is evolved to digest insect protein and berries. It's not designed to, or evolved, I should say. It's not evolved to metabolize and digest the high levels of non-starch polysaccharides in soybeans, or digest complex carbohydrates in cereals. So we need to look at, because I believe that the fish you indicated, Johan, and poultry are a fantastic resource for high quality protein, but we need to remove this competition from human edible food. And the way we do that is we look for alternatives. Insect protein is a fantastic alternative, be it feed or food. And I think as we look at more sustainable solutions, we need to consider the use of insect protein, because it is a fantastically digestible protein for poultry. I'm sure it would be in fish. I don't actually know of any studies, Johan, where they've used insect meal in fish. I'm sure there are.
Yes, they are also tested in fish, and it's very similar. The protein, the amino acid composition of most insect larvae, because mostly they use fly larvae, is almost perfect. Very similar to fish meal, which is also from the point of view of amino acid composition, the most ideal ingredient for fish. The problem with insects is more their fatty acid composition.
Yes.
They are, especially when there is a tendency to raise insects on waste material, on manure even sometimes, and then you get very saturated fat in the insects. So then you need a processing and separate the fat, so defat the insect so that you get really the protein only, and then it can be used really. Still, it is of course you farm animals, insects, to feed to animals. So I also think that a line of thought for the future for animal feeds is, and especially also for fish feeds, but it will count also for other animals, I guess, is to use leftover streams of the agro-food industry, whatever it is. So it can be all sorts of things.
I agree entirely. I think for monogastrics, pigs and poultry, I think there's a fantastic potential of using, waste food and byproducts as there used to be. The pig industry used to be raised on swill, which was leftover foods from hospitals, prisons, and schools. There's a huge requirement. Now, obviously, there's a public health debate, but we've advanced so much in understanding bacteriology, microbiology, mycotoxins, and the potential of disease transfer. So we should start to include some of these waste products within animal feeds. And of course, then that brings back to your point, Johan, about the potential of ruminants. Of course, they can utilize very high fiber feeds, which monogastrics and fish would not be able to. So, our pigs and our poultry would not be able to digest, for example, cellulose from the paper industry, whereas cattle could. Now, personally, I believe the role for ruminants is grazing. I think it's really important that ruminants graze because that's how they evolved, and I think that's a real important aspect when we raise livestock, that we do consider welfare aspects.
Yeah. Now that's a very difficult issue, I find, welfare aspects. My experience is that when I talk about fish, my experience is that that's also very culturally determined, animal welfare, how we look to how we should handle animals. So there is a large difference in the way we treat animals. No, I say it wrong. The public concern about animal welfare here, or for instance in Asia, or I know less about Africa, is quite different. And so I don't know how it is with other animals, but with fish, that's very different.
I think that the biggest issue with animal welfare, and it is extremely complex science, is we always try and turn it anthropogenically. So what we do, we consider that animal as if it was a human, and how our welfare would be if we were a chicken or we were a cow, and what we would consider as to be higher welfare standards. Now, okay, that's an easy approach, but it's not necessarily true. How, for example, poultry in a house. Now, we want to put, welfare standards to say there needs to be windows in that house, because as humans, we expect windows in a house. But will that add extra welfare for chickens to have windows in a house? Actually, the analysis has shown it doesn't, because if you've got a homogeneous house, there is no benefit within that house. As soon as you add a window, then you add some sort of degree of heterogeneity, and you start to encourage feather pecking and some sort of hierarchical structure. So you get hen pecking. So actually, you would say that the health status, in terms of defining welfare is reduced. So it's extremely complex when you start to impose anthropogenic solutions to animal welfare.
Well, it's actually also at the same time also so complex if we talk about sustainability. There were some studies here earlier in Wageningen where they compared, let's say, more rural extensive systems with high intensive farming systems of livestock. And then the CO2 emissions, let's say the whole environmental footprint of the intensive farming systems and welfare and the health aspects were much lower than in the, let's say, more extensive systems. While there were a lot of elements to say that these more extensive approaches were, of course, also beneficial for the livelihoods of poor people. So there you see a debate which makes it quite complex to make a final decision on this.
Yeah, it is very complex, and the fact that, you know, well, as a starting point, you will have very good intensive farmers who care massively about their animals, check their animals regularly, and you will have a high level of animal health. Now, that's slightly different to animal welfare, animal health in those intensive systems. But equally, you can have very, very poor, extensive farmers. Is that sun? Can you see me, Johan? Shall I move my screen?
It's okay.
It's okay.
You have some sunlight behind you.
Well, we're so not used to the sunlight in the UK, you know, that I just want to sit here. It's actually very
warm. Let it come in, because tomorrow there is no sun, maybe.
Absolutely. So I'm enjoying it. Yeah. So, but anyway, back to that point about extensive, and there will be some very poor extensive farmers equally, and there'll be some very good extensive farmers, and you could argue that their welfare or their health is lower because those animals are not checked as regularly. Now, the data you were indicating too about regarding animal health, certainly, if you are in a system where all your animals are in a house, they can be checked regularly, they can be monitored, their diet can be rationed, everything is controlled, their efficiency of nutrient transfer is going to be better because you're rationing their diet to meet their yield potential, so therefore emissions are going to be lower. They're not going. They might have lower levels of lameness because you're checking their feet daily because they're in a house. You can walk along them. Now, of course, that system compared to an animal out grazing, where you might see them twice a day because they're grazing, they're selecting their own food, and therefore their efficiency and their energy capture is not going to be as good. So you could argue in that first scenario, actually, you've got better emissions, you've got lower emissions and better sustainability and better animal health than the second scenario. But in the second scenario, that animal has the ability to express more natural behavior. Yeah. And it's showing more natural levels, and that is critical. And now that, I believe, defines welfare. You know, John Webster set out when, you know, the father of animal welfare and animal ethics, you know, the 5 freedoms, you know, and so many of them are freedoms from sickness or disease or issues. But the final one is not freedom from, it's freedom to express. And that's freedom to express natural behavior. And that's a critical part, which more intensive systems completely preclude.
If we bring this point now back to the question of food security, I would like to address a question that where I'm thinking over myself. I have no clear conclusion yet. It's the following: if we look to the global changes in the world, in the demographic changes, world population is growing enormously. But we see also in developing countries a strong urbanization. I think right now already more than half of the world population lives in cities or in the neighborhood of cities. I mean, 20 years from now, maybe 6.5 billion people will live there. We see a growing middle class, especially in Asia. Predictions that I've seen is that by 2050, the middle class in Asia will be much, much larger than here in the West. These changes, social and demographic changes, will have their influences of demand for food and the type of food they want to consume. Right now, we see that the richer some populations become, the more meat they eat, and the less fish or less plants they will eat. So the demand for animal source food will increase enormously because of these changes. And I was thinking, how should we go for it? Because if you have these big metropolitans, you cannot farm in an extensive way animals or whether it is livestock or fish far away, because they have to be transported. So there we need to develop kind of high intensive, almost urban type of farming close to these markets of these metropolitan areas. And that might be, because of the type of farming, that might be more, well, what is now considered luxury food. It can be chicken, it can be fish, whatever it is, but produced in a more intensive way. And then in the rural areas, for fish at least, I can say that fisheries, whether it comes from lakes or from the sea, might then supply the smaller fish, the cheaper fish for the poorer parts of the populations. How do you look to these kind of scenarios?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and I agree, Johan. And in fact, the hardest issue regarding sustainability that I try and get my head around as a natural scientist, which is very, very difficult, is actually that social science aspect of people's choices and changes. Urbanization is the area that concerns me the most, because, and that's for two reasons. The first reason you've already alluded to extremely well is the fact, that as people move into cities, they change their eating patterns and demand higher processed foods, be they animal-based proteins or refined sugars. The second one, which is the one that really, really does concern me, is a brain drain from rural communities. If we think about the biggest challenge that we have facing humankind, it's to feed a growing population in a sustainable way. So therefore, we need the most intelligent people in agriculture, in farms, to develop new feed solutions that is going to feed that population. Now, if all those people are moving to cities and away from agriculture and away from the fantastic world of farming, then who's going to have all these fantastic solutions? We need those solutions and new ways of farming. Now,
yes, but if I can interrupt, my idea was exactly that we might develop systems that are agricultural food producing systems that uses less land, is high intensive, and can be farmed or produced close to these cities or near the cities. So these smart people you are talking about can still be
in cities
for agriculture and producing food in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that para-urban culture of developing agricultural solutions will be needed. We will need lots of solutions. So you're right, it won't just be in rural communities, it will also be about urban food production. But we have two pathways to choose. We have the pathway where we accept the level of processed food production, animal-based protein that we currently consume, and therefore try to modify agriculture to meet the old Western style way of consuming, or we actually move towards a more sustainable food production system and move towards education of how we should consume. Because let's face it, with all the armories and all the tools that we have in the box in terms of intensive food production, be that arable or livestock, all the permacultural systems that we could develop, none of those will feed 9.5 billion people in 2050 on a current Western style diet. We just don't have the resources available. So therefore, we need to combine education of what a healthy diet looks like. And I believe as part of that education and part of what a healthy food source looks like, then the degree of intensification that we see, particularly within ruminant systems, would be not more appropriate. So we could actually limit livestock product consumption by changing the way we produce those foods and raise those livestock. And I think that will tie hand in hand, because I believe a more sustainable way of utilizing ruminants in food security is through grazing, is for using land not suitable for growing crops. But you will produce higher levels of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide associated with that. So therefore, maybe you need to regulate the amount that you actually consume and reduce that to a level where that methodology of production delivers the amount of nutrients required for human food. But, sorry, Johan, go on.
Yeah, it's okay. Maybe we should move to the questions of the students now.
Are there some coming in? I'm blinded by the sun.
Apparently, but first a question, the light behind you, the sun is really intensive. Maybe you can turn your screen a bit.
There we go. Is that better?
So there was a question I see here that for you, whether poultry can digest complex foods such as berries or soya. Did you say that it cannot digest these kind of things? Yeah,
there are, well, contained within a lot of these foods are what we call non-starch polysaccharides, NSPs. So these are complex carbohydrates, and poultry do not produce the enzyme to digest them. So these can either be digested within the feed mix, so you would add enzymes to aid that digestion process. So certain enzymes actually can be extracted from bread mold. But you know, it seems strange we actually should feed a diet where the birds actually find it quite hard to digest some of that carbohydrate source, when there are alternatives which they could digest. And I think as well, you know, one of the major issues associated with the poultry industry is gut health. Does not lead to good gastrointestinal health. If you look at the microbiome of the chicken, it is struggling because it has to deal with some carbohydrate sources which the microbes will then ferment and not lead to a good, healthy microbiome of the bird. Now, one way of controlling that in current Western practices is to use antibiotics. So I think, again, another more sustainable solution for the poultry industry would be to help to find alternative diets which are more digestible, and therefore could reduce the requirement of antimicrobials within the feed ration.
That's the interesting part also. Well, the same kind of question happens also in fish.
Yeah.
And there is a very interesting research going on at Ghent University in Belgium, where they were producing these bioflocks in systems, and these bacteria, they produce polyhydroxybutyrate. Actually, PHB is being used to make plastics also. But in smaller amounts, when you add that to the feed, it really works as an immunomodulator. And it has a very strong protective, I say it has not a protective effect, but it stimulates a protective effect through the gut health. So indeed, this whole intestinal health issues is coming up now, and it's really, really interesting. But I do believe that by applying fermentation technologies for feed ingredients, and then there you might have positive effect of the fibers also, If you lock them a bit and have some fermentation and the pre-processing, some enzymes, you may have a very positive effect on the intestinal health.
But that, that is driven by possibly modifying a diet through supplements to make it more suitable to the animal, rather than modifying the diet which is more suitable. So therefore, and the same response with butyrate is found in poultry, which improves the gut cell junctions. So improves the gut cell, so you have less leaking cells within the gut. And there's many supplements which work fantastically well, and there's lots of really great products out there. You know, yeast, for example, is another one where, you know, the oligosaccharides, the mannose within the yeast cell walls can help modulate the microbiome of the gut and improve gut health. But again, that's a supplement because the diet isn't right.
Yeah, that's
Chickens
true.
did not evolve to eat soya.
Yeah, I go for another question here. I read, would soya nutrition for fish in an enclosed aquaculture environment be less dangerous? You are still competing with higher level food chain, but the plant-based feces would be used by plants, yes, is the question. Don't know whether I really understand that question very well, but it's indeed, I think the participant here touches the domain or the area of integrated farming or multi-trophic farming systems. With fish, we have the so-called aquaponic systems, and that's typically for the West, where you farm fish on one hand, and the effluent of the fish tanks, rich in nutrients, in ammonia or nitrates on one hand, phosphates, and the sludge, which is basically feces, is being used for these two, the water especially, being used for hydroponic cultures at the site in a greenhouse. So to recover part of these wasted nutrients. In the sea, you see now kind of multi-product farming, where you have salmon cages on one hand, and besides there or around there, you have seaweed being farmed to, let's say, extract the nutrients that are being put into the water by the animals, or through the animals, by feeding the animals. And I think similar kind of systems will probably also work with livestock, the crop livestock kind of integration. I have the feeling a bit the same kind of question.
So yeah, just comment on that before the next question. I agree entirely about the benefits of integrated systems. You know, I think in many parts of the world, crop, livestock, mixed farming systems are going to be more sustainable and more nutrient efficient than monocultures or separation of those industries. We're moving away, by separating those industries, we lose some of the interactions and the benefit of nutrient flows, particularly the use of manures. A system which you highlighted, I saw in India, where they had ponds of carp and they had azolla, which is like a duckweed growing on top of it, which is high in protein. And they used to skim that off to feed the dairy cows, which worked very well, phenomenally well. Yes. And then they could use the fish were obviously there to supply, you know, key nutrients, and then the sludge was actually then fertilizing napier grass for growing for the fiber levels. So it was a really great integrated system. Brilliant.
Yeah, from a nutrient point of view, it's really brilliant. That's absolutely true. But from a management point of view, it's very complicated to balance the different aspects. And that's basically the reason why it is not gaining widespread interest once people start to intensify. Then at that moment, they abandon that kind of system. It's really typical for extensive rural systems, and it originated in Asia especially. James Edel says that He wonders whether the use of complex feeds on animals was due to a lack of knowledge in early farming. I would not have a good answer on this. What do you think, Michael?
Well, we've known for a long time the nutrition requirements of livestock, but I suppose what we haven't kept pace with modern livestock is genetic improvements. You know, if you look back at the nutritional requirements, particularly of the sheep within the UK, you know, some of those standards were written back in the 50s and the 60s, and we're feeding animals which are very, very different from that. So I don't know whether feeding complex food is naivety. We figured out a long time ago what key nutrients are required for those livestock, but often our nutritional standards have not kept pace with genetic demand. I don't know if I'm addressing the question completely, but I'm a little bit confused with why feeding complex foods would be due to our naivety.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more related to the feeding of soya into chickens. Why do we choose the feeding of soya? Is that our naivety? Well, basically it's because it's a really, really good source of protein and amino acids, and because these birds grow so quick, same with, I'm sure, with fish, that they need really good protein sources. So therefore we know that there are issues associated with soya, and you try and bypass them by adding supplements or other things. So I don't think it's naivety, it's driven by the need to find a very high quality protein source.
Yeah.
And particularly,
and I think it's also a matter of supply.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's combination. It's a very high quality ingredient, soya, both for fish and for livestock. It has a very good amino acid composition. The digestibility is very high, and it is available in large quantities. That's also important. I learned from feed manufacturers who are now investing in feed mills in Africa that they would like to use local ingredients, protein ingredients, but there are no alternatives for them for soya. And the local soya is not of sufficient quality, so they import it from Brazil, which is, to my view, not really a sustainable way of development.
Yeah, it's the same. There's the huge demand on imports of soya. You know, as I say, as a protein source, it is a very good protein source, but there are other aspects of it which are less beneficial.
Mr. Rai Schneider wonders why the Dutch government has policies against red meat consumption. I thought I commented on it already. I've not the details. I'm not a human nutritionist, as I said, but I think that their main concern is the observed correlation between red meat consumption and all sorts of human health problems. We eat too much sugar and we eat too much red meat. Basically, these are the kind of two ideas. So
yeah, my only comment on that is we have to really be careful of not confusing red meat and processed meat. Although I also do agree, Johan, that there has been some studies and some meta-analyses that has shown some risk factors associated with consumption of red meat. But I have to say that the risk levels are significantly lower than processed meat. And may I just say, you know, they are far lower than the risk levels of consuming alcohol.
Yeah.
I don't think the Dutch are complaining about too much alcohol consumption.
Yeah. That's hot news right now, actually. We should not drink any alcohol anymore. Absolutely.
Well, maybe we'll get the Heineken breweries on us then.
Yeah. Last question of Mr. Ansolin, Jelson Ansolin. How could we motivate producers to change the way they farm in a more sustainable way?
Yeah, fantastic question. And I think it starts with us. It starts with the consumer. You know, the farmers will only produce and retailers will only buy and sell what the consumer wants and will purchase. So we have to make that decision. A perfect example about consumer pressure and consumer success was, I don't know in the Netherlands, but speaking from a UK perspective, was on free-range eggs. You know, supermarkets were basically saying, you know, the retailer will buy cheaper battery eggs. They won't pay more for free-range eggs. But they trialed it, and the consumer did. The consumer decided that actually, no, we do want free-range eggs, and we don't mind paying more for them. Now, that has led to a huge change over only a short space of time in the move from battery egg production, which was cheaper, significantly cheaper, to more free-range eggs, and the consumer was willing to pay for it. So ultimately, it starts with the consumer. If we make decisions and want to purchase, then we will. And that's same to all animal products.
Yes, it's actually, now you touch an issue. We cannot enter in that kind of discussion now because the time is over. But what we do see in seafood, for instance, is that through the action groups like WWF in the time, but in close cooperation with the industry, with retailers, it was clear that public opinion wanted more sustainable sourced seafood, and they have developed certification schemes like the Marine Stewardship Council, or nowadays also the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, and I think also in the UK and here in the Netherlands and in Denmark and so on, most retailers have agreed that they will sell at least 60, 70, or even 80% of their seafood under this label. And so that to give a kind of a guarantee to the consumer that the seafood that they buy in their supermarkets is sustainably produced. Mm-hmm. And it is working. You have to pay more, but people buy it also. So there is a strong tendency, trend here in the Netherlands towards more biological, more sustainable produced food.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. Greg?
I'm trying to read what's written down in the chat box here. I understand that participants can also start a discussion group about animal products. Maybe we should invite them to do so if they are interested in doing so. But that's to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do not have the live chat with the participants right now. It's by writing and typing.
That's it. Yeah.
I found it a very interesting discussion, Michael.
Yeah, I really enjoyed chatting to you, Johan. It's been great. It's a great opportunity, and possibly we can meet up in the Netherlands and go for a beer.
Yeah, but they have some beer, but I think some British pubs have better beers than here.
Well, that'll be another chat room.
Okay.
Thank you, Johan.
Thank you very much, Michael. And all the participants, thanks for listening. You survived it, I would say.
Yes.
And I would suggest, or I would wish to all of you also a very nice continuation in this course. Thank you all.
Thank you. Enjoy the course.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.